Welcome to the Experts in Sport podcast, brought to you by the School of Sport, Exercise and Health Sciences at Loughborough University.
Today I'm with Professor Emma Haycraft and Dr. Gemma Witcomb, and we'll be discussing their research and the development of the Child Feeding Guide, which was co-developed with Professor Claire Farrow, who's now at Aston University. Emma is a Professor of Psychology and Public Health. Her research focuses on children's eating behaviours and caregiver feeding practices, with the aim of supporting the development of dietary variety within children and young people, both in the UK and abroad. Emma is a co-developer of the award-winning Child Feeding Guide, an evidence-based website and web app which supports caregivers to achieve healthy, happy mealtimes with their children. She's been conducting research in this area for over 20 years and has led a variety of research studies which have contributed to the information contained within the Child Feeding Guide. Her research helps to bring about health behaviour change, and Emma works closely with families and professionals who will benefit from the findings of her research. Gemma is a senior lecturer in psychology. Gemma's research career began in the field of adult eating behaviour over 15 years ago, exploring the influence of learning, cognition, and dietary restriction on food intake and preferences. Since then, she's conducted research in a number of areas, including those related to feeding, eating, and body image in both infant and adults. Her interest in child eating behaviour and parental feeding practices grew out of her own anxiety-ridden experiences feeding her children and the lack of comprehensive resources explaining the science behind infant feeding, the all-important why. With a background in usable and design of web-based applications, she's particularly interested in using technology to provide information, support and training in this area. Hi, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
No problem. So today we're going to talk about overcoming fussy eating. We're going to focus on your research, the development and impacts of the Child Feeding Guide, and what's next for your research and innovation. But before we get into that, can you let me know what made you interested in researching around fussy eating?
I think we were doing research in the area, and the more we spoke to parents and caregivers, the more we became aware of the fact that fussy eating is a really, really common phenomenon. And so we were keen to kind of understand what we could do with our research to identify ways to effectively support parents and caregivers and professionals with dealing with this kind of typical phase of children's development.
For me, I was interested in learning theory, so how we learn about food and likes and dislikes, more with adults, but then having had my own kids, it kind of kicked that off of, we know about this learning, we know how important it is, but it's not really seen in the resources that were given out by the NHS. So trying to look at that, why is it not given, how can we give it, and what improvements can it make?
It's a really interesting one, because I did wonder whether it was like, I've got kids and I just can't work them out, or whatever, because, I've got kids as well, and you can reflect on it. I think we might touch upon this later. You can reflect on it going, well, just eat that food, or some of the things that we will talk about. I've gone, yeah, definitely, I've done that.
Yeah.
So
why didn't anyone tell me this?
Yeah,
was my feeling.
That's a really good point. So hopefully we'll touch upon them as we go on. Obviously, the podcast is bridging the gap between academia, professional practice, and you've got a resource there with the Child Feeding Guide website, which we'll talk about as well. But with this being academia, can you give me a definition of what fussy eating is?
Oh, now that's a good question. I think our interpretation of fussy eating is around when children either refuse to eat a food, and that might be a new food that they've never seen or tasted before, so they might just look at it and say, I'm not going to eat that. But also it kind of captures when children refuse a food that they've previously eaten. So, they might have happily munched on some red pepper yesterday, and then you present it to them and they're like, that's disgusting, I'm not eating that. So I think when we're talking about fussy eating, that's probably what we would capture. Have I missed anything?
No, I think, I think the way we define it when we're talking about it is it's very developmental. It's a normal thing that children go through, and there's reasons why it's happening, rather than it's just a child being temperamental.
That's a really good point, I think. And let's dig into that now. So what are those reasons that it's happening, and how is that part of kind of development, so hopefully to help parents not get too frustrated by it?
Well, kids will eat foods, they willingly accept those foods, and part of that when they're very little is because really they've not got the conscious awareness of what's going on, they're being fed. As they start to develop, they suddenly become more aware of what you're giving them, and actually as that cognition kicks in, some of that can then be fear basically. They're suddenly like, oh, what is this? What's happening here? when they're a bit younger, they're not having that. So part of it's just the cognitive development that their brain's going through, that suddenly they're more aware of things. And then we all make associations between, if I've had a certain food, I didn't really like it, you're giving it to me again, I'm not really sure about it. But part of it is evolutionary. So we innately like certain foods. So sweet foods, for example, breast milk's very sweet, fruit's very sweet. Most kids will accept fruit quite easily. So we innately like sweet stuff. And we innately don't like bitter things. And it's believed to be an evolutionary protective process that normally things that are bitter are probably not good for you. It can signal that they're poisonous, etc., etc. So kids also go through this phase where they start to refuse those kinds of foods. They might have eaten them before, but now they're refusing them. And that's believed to be this developmental process where that cognition's kicking in, that kind of evolutionary reaction's kicking in, that, oh, this is bitter, I'm not sure about this. So obviously as an adult, we logically know the food's okay, but they don't.
I like that. And reflecting on that is very much as a parent, you can be like, this is part of the process. And I'm not going to get frustrated that they're not eating their broccoli. Yeah. My kids at the minute will eat the broccoli stem, but not the floret.
Interesting.
And I'm like, why?
Texture.
That's exactly the reason they've given. That is the reason. So, yeah, do you get that a lot?
Yeah, some kids are more sort of susceptible to the texture of foods. So my son, for example, really likes crunchy foods. So he would often, he's a bit better now, but he would often, all of his veg would always be raw because that's how he liked it. So what's the point of trying to push on him cooked vegetables if he's quite happy to eat them raw? And it's the texture. He likes the crunchy things.
I like that. So we've touched upon some little things there, but can we dig a bit deeper into the research? So what does your research actually tell us about overcoming fussy eating?
I think one of the main things and one of the key messages that we really wanted to get out there was that it can take time to support children to learn to like foods. We also know from research that actually many parents will stop reoffering a refused or a food that's perceived to be disliked after sort of 2-3 offerings. But we know, as Gemma said, it's kind of about children learning to like different tastes and textures. And in order for that to happen, children need to be repeatedly exposed to, they need to have kind of frequent interactions with this food so that they can kind of break down that fear response, so that something which might seem like it's bitter and could be harmful, actually it's about them learning that it's okay and it's safe to eat. So repeated exposure is really key, repeated offering, but also things like seeing other people eating the food is really beneficial. So that could be parents or caregivers, it could be other children in nursery or school. That helps to reaffirm that, you know, other people are liking it and enjoying it. Maybe it's not so bad. And children learn a lot through copying others. It's a key part of how they learn about all sorts of things in life. So yeah, those are two key things I think we're keen to get across.
So the reoffering side, I think I did read where how many times you should reoffer this from some of your research. How many times should you be reoffering?
So it varies from child to child. Some children will just eat everything on the kind of first time they're offered it. But the research suggests it could take anywhere between kind of 8, 15, 20 offerings. And we're not talking about kind of offering every single mealtime incessantly. You know, it can be over a period of weeks or months or even years. And it's about just giving children opportunities in safe spaces to learn about these foods. And this reoffering can be away from a mealtime, so giving children a piece of a food at a snack time, for example, can be helpful. It can reduce the feeling or the expectation that they need to eat it. And reoffering can also involve giving children opportunities to touch foods, to kind of smell them or lick them. Even things like reading stories about them can be beneficial for helping children to increase their familiarity with different foods.
And is there something in, so I'm just going back to like, you know, childhood hang-ups here. So should my parents have tried to hide veg in my mashed potato? Because I would call them out on it and be like, no, that's in there. I know it's in there, and I still don't eat peas now.
Yeah, probably not. Probably wouldn't recommend doing that. But I completely empathise, and a lot of parents do that, trying to hide food. I think, as you've just described quite well, when you're aware of it as a child and you catch them out, that's not done anything positive to make the child want to then eat the food. You've almost reinforced negativity around having tried to trick them. So we wouldn't recommend hiding it in that way. Blending stuff down sometimes so it's not even identifiable, that's kind of a different story. That's a good way of getting the nutrients in, but not kind of trying to keep a food as it is, but cover it in a particular way.
Veg pasta blended. That's gone down well with my kids. That's
Yeah.
the sneaky one of getting a lot of veg in there.
Yeah.
And
they
that's
quite like
that is
it.
brilliant, as Gemma says, for kind of the nutrients and for getting your children to kind of eat a variety of different nutrients and food groups and stuff. But if your goal is to help your child to learn to like broccoli and you've blitzed it up so it's completely not identifiable, then that's not helping them to learn to like broccoli because they don't know they're eating it. So that's why I think there's kind of two things. Yeah, if the goal is to help children to understand that actually sprouts can be okay if they're not massively overcooked, don't blitz them or hide them into something. Give them opportunities to taste them in different forms, and that might be raw or it might be kind of boiled or roasted, or different forms can be helpful as well for helping children to learn to like them.
Good advice coming through here. So you mentioned as well that you talked a little bit about positive reinforcement there. So have you gone into some of the research around the psychology of that side of things?
Yeah, so I think I might let Emma talk about this actually, because we've done some papers on this.
That's absolutely fine. Yes, so some of our research shows that children can be effectively rewarded for trying different foods. What the evidence is really clear about is that these rewards should not be another food. So we're not suggesting that you say, if you try your broccoli, you can have some ice cream, because actually that makes the ice cream even more desired and the broccoli even less desired. But stickers, for example, or kind of a trip to the playground, these kinds of non-food rewards can be helpful for reinforcing children's tasting behaviours. And again, this should be done without any kind of pressure or force for children to actually chew or swallow the foods. It's about giving children opportunities to interact with the foods to increase that familiarity. But yeah, non-food rewards can be really effective.
Note to self, the ice cream and the dessert, eat or eat dinner type stuff. I'll have to think that one through. But I think we're going to touch upon that a little bit later on around the guilt that parents might feel. If we are putting things out there that you're thinking, oh no, I'm a terrible parent or a caregiver, then please don't. We're going to touch upon that later on, and it's going to help me as well. So in terms of what parents and caregivers can do to help to overcome fussy eating, what other kind of tips do you have around there? I think you mentioned around different ways that they can have the foods, so whether that be boiled or raw or roasted or whatever else. Are there other ways and tactics that you've used to help?
Yeah, I think there's lots of different things that parents can do. Just coming back to a point that you sort of referred to, I think it can be really tempting to feel like you need to sort of heavily encourage your children to taste and try foods. But actually what the research evidence is clear about is that sort of pressure, any force to eat a food, actually has the opposite of the intended effect. So if you're there and you're a child who's eaten whatever they want to off their plate and they've left their peas, and the parent's thinking, well, this isn't good for their health, they need to eat those peas, and says you need to have 3 more spoonfuls of peas, or you're not leaving the table until you finish those peas, done with the best of intentions, actually that is not helping the child to develop a positive feeling about those peas. It's going to make the mealtime more emotionally charged, which we know can actually create more negative associations with the food. So I think one of the things that parents will sometimes do with the best of intentions, but we know is not actually as effective as it seems, is kind of pressuring or forcing children to eat a food that they don't like.
It's interesting because as you say it, we've certainly done that, but as you say it, you're thinking it does make sense when you actually take that step back and think about it. I think, well, being made to do something, you'll resent both that food and your parents for that short period of time. So why do we do that? And I am guilty of all these things. So it is very helpful. Other things that I think I picked up from the website, I think one was interesting around fruit. So obviously the government guidelines being 5 fruit and veg a day. I think, have you guys done some research around how many fruit and veg a day children actually do, or is there research around that they actually eat?
There's definitely research around that, and it's a lot less than 5 a day. And often, even when kids are hitting 5 a day, it can be predominantly purely fruit. So it does need to be fruit and veg. Fruit obviously is great, but it has a lot of sugar, and the veg is the thing that most children struggle with. It's not really the fruit. So most kids aren't getting anywhere near 5 a day. And even some research suggests it should be more than 5 a day anyway, but 5 is a more kind of acceptable benchmark. I think related to what Emma was just saying, and it kind of relates to this about portions of things, I think one thing that parents do sometimes struggle with is knowing portion sizes for children. So again, if you're actually offering your child way too much food than they could even eat for their age, they're going to be leaving food and refusing food because they're full. And then if you're pressuring them on top of that to eat the last bit of their peas, we've kind of got two things going on: rejection of a food because they might not like it, the vegetable, but also they've actually eaten enough. And as a parent, your misconception of how much they can physically eat can be part of the problem as well. So there can be pressure for two different reasons there. So then when you link that to you need your 5 portions of fruit and veg, but you're giving them too much, they're not going to hit 5 different portions because the portion size is just too big in the first place.
It's a very good point that you have to sit back and reflect and think, well, how big is their stomach compared to mine, and what's their portion and the plate size and things like that. All these tactics that may be used. Yeah, that's what we try and do, rightly or wrongly, with some of these, because most of these things I've got wrong. But there's a tick in the box that smaller portion size and a smaller plate seems to help.
It's hard though. It's really hard, and I've written this, and I still do some of these things. Still do some things because in the moment you do, and it's always from a place of love, isn't it? You want to feed your child and nourish your child, and you want them to eat and be healthy. But we can fall into traps of doing things that are having the opposite of the desired effect.
I think some of the things from your website are good, talking around the vegetable side of things, fruit and vegetables. The exposure monitor that you guys mentioned in your website is an interesting one, because again, it's one that without people monitoring it, they don't realise how much fruit and veg they're not eating. In fact, we can look at me today. So far, I haven't had any. So far, I will sort that out at lunchtime and later. I've already made a chili later that's got 4 different vegetables in it, so I'll be okay. Yes. But I'm already there at the moment, and that's that's somebody who knows some of this stuff. So what have you done some work with exposure monitoring and them kind of tracking what they're doing? Has that been helpful?
From the website, we've got data that shows the parents that have used the exposure monitor what they've been doing, and I think in the early days we were finding that people were using that monitor to track up to 15-20 exposures, which is great, because we know, as Emma said, that most people don't track to that far. So we know it's had a positive effect from the data we've got, just looking at how people are using it.
Nice. And some of the other things that you've got on here for your website, so you talk about play. How could play help?
I think play is great because it's about helping to make sure that food stays an enjoyable part of children's kind of lifestyle. So there are some good things that you can do to help children to become more familiar with foods in playful ways. There's some really nice evidence around reading storybooks and the effect of kind of reading a story about a strawberry, for example, for helping children to feel less fearful of strawberries. There's some recent evidence actually that's come out of the University of Reading looking at e-books, which are also been shown to be effective. But also it's about using foods in playful ways, and we think childcare settings can be particularly helpful in this regard. So it might be printing with potatoes or using a bit of broccoli to kind of create a masterpiece. And at the same time as hopefully being fun for the children, it's giving them the opportunities to interact with, to touch, to feel those foods without any pressure to eat them. And the evidence is really clear that this can help, in the long run, children to be more familiar with a variety of foods. And if they're more familiar with them, they're then more likely to go on and eat them.
I like it, keep kind of creating that positive relationship. Yeah. There was one I did look at from that was, I think, on your website around vegetable maths. And I thought, wow, that could really be a double negative for some people. So maybe try vegetable math if you like maths.
Absolutely. Well, we thought there's some education behind this. It's using vegetables to help children learn about maths. So it's Vegetable Maths Masters. It's a free app out there, like the Child Feeding Guide. And it's, we thought children need to learn about maths. It's taught in schools. So it's another educational resource. And we thought, what better way to give another way to expose children to vegetables than pairing it with maths.
And some of their favourite subjects, maths.
Absolutely.
Other things that you've got include things like growing your own. You got any tips and advice on that?
Yeah, I think this is something that can be kind of quite simple. So we're not talking about having a massive great allotment, or it's just giving children an opportunity to learn about where their food comes from. So it could be as simple as growing crust seeds in a yoghurt pot on a windowsill, or it could be a little bit more adventurous. But actually children tend to enjoy being involved in taking ownership for the food. And in many cases, children are then more likely to go on and eat the food that they've been involved in growing, as long as it's been grown successfully. I don't always have success with my tomatoes, for example.
Last year was a nightmare for tomatoes. So I've got a greenhouse and a little kitchen garden, as we call it, and tomatoes were a nightmare last year. They got burnt. It just got too hot, and they just got destroyed in my greenhouse. So that was a shame. But my boy we've always grown things. My boy, you can put tomatoes in front of him, and I will just, when he's eating whatever, I'll just put tomatoes on the table. He can eat half the punnet without even thinking about it. So that's a good one. And I wrote them down here, actually, having looked at that. We grow kind of onions, potatoes, strawberries, raspberries, pears. They will eat anything out of the garden. Now, cress you mentioned there, they will try that and spit it out, usually. But the rest of it, yeah, they are quite keen, especially grown from seed. They're really kind of keen on using that. So I like that one. That's and you can do that from your windowsill or whatever.
Yeah, we had a PhD student, Robbie Crowder, work with us, and he did some work on this and found, as Emma said, that the children are more likely to taste the food that they've grown themselves, and they get a lot of enjoyment from that, and there's obviously educational value generally. But also that they reported that they're kind of happier. There's some effects on well-being of children growing their own things, their own foods, and being involved with a parent or with a teacher in doing that. So again, there's more than just the food to a lot of these interventions. It has kind of wider benefit.
Definitely, they have to get in digging the garden at my house, so that's a much bigger benefit for them. So yeah, they do really enjoy it though. They do really actually get involved in it and eat the majority of the stuff we do. So I'm in for that one, definitely. You've also mentioned some other pieces around shopping, and I thought that was an interesting one. So involving kids going shopping and seeing those varieties of foods. What is it that's there with shopping? What's the idea behind that?
Again, it can be a positive experience around food. So they're being exposed to different foods, but not in a pressured way of this is now on your plate, you're going to eat it. So it's about the exposure. As I said, it can be a positive experience because it's non-pressured, but also it's just showing them a variety. So in a way, even if you may have quite a limited variety at home, it's trying to get them to see that there are these different foods. And at some point, the child will be interested in, oh, what's that? What might that taste like? And again, that's way more positive if they're instigating that themselves rather than it being forced upon them.
Success story for you again here. So the only way to get them to go to the supermarket is for them to take it into hands to pick things, themselves. Mm-hmm. They will fight of whose turn it is, but we generally get through it. And kiwis was one that my son was like, oh, they're fluffy and weird. Loves them. Mm-hmm. And like kiwis was one that he picked off the shelf, and then he now eats kiwis all the time. So
brilliant.
It's the autonomy, isn't it? Because if you think about it, as adults, we choose what we eat every day, but children don't get that autonomy. So allowing them a bit of that, I think, is good.
I mean, one more that I'm going to steal from your website here is around education. I know you've mentioned already reading, and I thought within what you'd put, it was mentioned around playing computer games. But also research. And I did think, has there been any research around the use of Alexa and kind of Google and asking those questions around food at all? Or is that somewhere that nobody's gone yet?
Oh, I'm not aware of any research that's looked into that. It's only a matter of time, surely, though.
Yeah, no, me neither.
I just tried to contextualise with some of the stuff that you guys, have put out there. I thought, it's great. How's this working in my life? And we do often sit there and the kids will ask a question. Obviously, I don't know the answer, and Alexa often does. So I did think actually that's quite an interesting one. Like this is from Chris Evans' show. Actually, this is from Virgin. Apparently, Brazil. Apparently, Brazil is named after Brazil nut, not the other way around.
Really?
I need to check whether that's true or not. Actually, before I go saying things on here, but he said it, so apparently that's true.
Okay.
So we'd go and investigate and see if that's true.
Yeah.
But I thought that was interesting, and finding out origins of food and things like that could be a nice way of doing it. So maybe somebody can look at that in the future. Moving forward, I know on your website you talk about what the when, where, why, and what awareness exercise. So can you talk me through what that is?
Yeah, so this was a reflective exercise, really, to try and get parents to reflect on when they've kind of had what they, I guess, would deem a good day and their child has eaten something and has not been fussy and has not refused, what the context of that was. Because when you're feeding kids, as a busy parent, you may not take the time to reflect on that, but actually you may see patterns. So going back to what I said before about my son, he would be refusing if it's cooked, but he would be eating if it's raw. And it may take a bit of time for you actually to kind of twig on those different scenarios of what's happening, but also looking at when you're trying to give a child a food. So maybe they're always refusing when it's their lunchtime meal and before their nap, because actually they're just tired and can't cope with it at that point. So it was just a reflective exercise to try and get parents to look at when they're having a good time around food and when they're having a bad time, and if there's any patterns there. And that's the first battle, isn't it? Recognising those patterns and then being able to move on from them and work on them.
I think I mentioned to you before, I looked at this yesterday and was like, I'm stealing that. Because the when, where, why and what, we talk about emotional eating in our gym. I've mentioned this to the listeners before, that we own a gym and we do have kind of one-on-one nutrition sessions and talk about things like emotional eating. But I think the way you've broken this down makes it really simple into, well, when is that happening, or where is that happening, and why, and what can you do about it, or what is it that's being consumed? I think that's a really nice way of...
And this tool can also be used to not just monitor, when you've given a fruit and veg and when that's been eaten, but when you've given anything. So it can be useful for parents to reflect on their behaviour when they're giving, for example, things that they might not want to. So when did I give my kid some biscuits? Oh, it's because he was crying and we were coming out of this particular scenario. So actually it links to what you're saying about how you use food to manage emotions or situations.
This is where I've had a shocker again here, because you've got on your website when, often around 3 p.m. Now, if you had my kids in here now and asked them what 3 p.m. was, it's ice cream o'clock. So, that's not every day. It is a summer thing and we do kind of stop it. But at 3 o'clock in the summer, if they don't get ice cream, then I'm in trouble. So, I need to reflect upon this and think about how I can change that trigger.
But some of those things can be nice. They can be positive experiences around food. So we're not saying, don't ever do things like that, not at all, because food has to be enjoyable. And it's all about balance and moderation, isn't it? But this tool's about also looking at, I guess, coming back to learning. What can you learn from this? Are there particular ways that things are presented that kids are finding more acceptable?
So the final bit that I was touching upon on your website would be around the common pitfalls. So on here, you've got things like food refusal, unhealthy food preferences, pressure to eat, food as a reward, restriction, and role modelling. I think we've touched upon a fair few of them, but probably not all of them. I think probably one that jumps out at me now is around role modelling. So can you talk me through the role modelling side of things?
Yeah, I think this comes back to something we started to talk about earlier, in that children like to copy. And an effective way our own research and other research has shown of helping children to eat foods is to see other people eating those foods. Imagine the situation of giving you a new food and I've said, here you go, Martin, dig in, and I just sit back and watch you eat it. You might be much more willing to try this new food if I'm eating it with you. This happened to me on a work trip. I was in Kenya and there were some termites, which is a very common food in Kenya. Everybody ate them. I tried them and everybody ate them, but I would have been much more wary about trying these foods if they'd just said, here you go, Emma. I wouldn't have known if it was a joke. Is this okay? Why is nobody else eating them? So I think it's really important that children see other people eating, and that can be parents and caregivers, it can be other siblings, it can be other family members, but also peers and friends at nursery and school have a really important role in modelling eating behaviours as well.
That just brought a real flashback to me of a bit of a nightmare with eating strange foods like termites. So on a trip in Australia in the outback, and it was role modelling. So the leader of it was like, we're going to go eat some witchetty grubs, and he's gone literally digging in the dirt and got these dirty, I don't know what, massive caterpillars, let's describe them as that, and he's gone, this is the way to eat them. And I think you have to bite the head off, or I can't remember now how to do it. But I did do it. It's the worst, most horrendous thing I've ever done before. But it was probably peer pressure, maybe role modelling. Well, he didn't die, so let's do it. But yeah, that was horrendous. So sometimes it's not great. Yeah. Don't take that bit away with you. So the other one that jumped out to me was around unhealthy food preferences. So why do kids want to eat? I mean, maybe not just kids. There might be, why do I like to eat chocolate and crisps and maybe not veg and fruit as much? So why does that happen? Because
it tastes really nice. And it's very satisfying. So the obviously most of these things, chocolate, sweets, puddings, tend to be very sweet, and we are, as I said at the beginning, kind of innately wired to like that. It signals something's got energy in it. We need energy to survive. The post-ingestive kind of feedback that your body gives you after you're eating something that's high fat is nice. So it acts as a positive feedback loop. That was really good, I'd want more of that. So we're kind of programmed to like this stuff in a way. So kids inherently are going to like it. We as adults make a lot of decisions around what we eat, like you say, as somebody in the know of, I know this is good for me, I know I need to eat this much, etc., etc. Children are going on palatability and what is lovely for them. So it's kind of a no-brainer that if we didn't have to think about health and weight, nutrients, we would probably all just be in galaxies and Easter eggs. But so they haven't got the cognition to think, oh no, I shouldn't eat that. I need to balance it with this. So it's innate preference really. But also when they're very young, if they've not had enough exposure to these other things, these, fruits and vegetables and healthier foods and, high protein meals that maybe don't have all that kind of sugar and sweetness in, we also learn to like things by that repeated taste. So we've got their bodies saying, oh, we really like this high-fat sugary thing, but they will like the other stuff if over time they have repeated exposure to it. So the job as a parent, I guess, is to balance those two things out. They're going to want the other things. It's okay to let them have some of that, but they need to keep being exposed to the other things so they'll learn to like the preferences for the things that aren't delivering that kind of high sugar, high fat kick.
Yeah, you mentioned Galaxy there, and it gave me a twitch because that Galaxy is my one. That's my go-to, and I may or may not have had too much of it yesterday. So you may have noticed I was on that one. Now you've talked about we've given a bit of an overview of the child eating guide here. I did mention earlier on that what we're saying here is hopefully there to be helpful and certainly not judgmental, and hopefully we've cast that we are certainly not angels, and we've made many of these common mistakes as well. But I know you did do a little bit of research, I think, around anxiety. How is the child feeding guide helping with anxiety for mothers? I think the research was that you did.
I think part of the reason that we were keen to set up the child feeding guide was because we were doing all of this research and we were doing kind of focus groups and talking to families, and they were telling us that they were concerned, and we knew that there were sort of tips and tricks that we could suggest and recommend. One of the sort of startling early findings, I think, that we discovered was how easily parents were reassured about having a child who was a fussy eater once they understood that that was really common and it wasn't just them. So we did some research. We asked some mothers to use the child feeding guide for 4 weeks and measured a few different things about their feeding practices and their anxiety levels. And reassuringly, we found that having used the child feeding guide, their levels of general anxiety decreased. And that's brilliant because that's one of the key goals of the child feeding guide. It's about sharing the evidence-based information in an accessible way to help empower families really to help their children to develop a healthy relationship with food and to have a varied diet. So there's never any kind of judgment. Actually, the goal of this was to reduce anxiety levels and help parents to feel more confident to support their children with eating a dietary variety.
Great answer, because you've pretty much answered my next question, which was around why did you develop the website. And I think from what we've talked about, it's clear that within your website, you've got lots of evidence-based practice that we've mainly talked about parents and caregivers can utilise. But is it who is it aimed at? Is it parents and caregivers, or is there a wider field that you're trying to target with this as well?
The initial development was for parents and caregivers, and within the feeding pitfalls, we have it's split into sections of what, why, what to do. So particularly what I found with my children and the NHS resources that I was seeing is it was always the what to do, but not with the what's going on with the child, why are they exhibiting that behaviour, and kind of explaining the underlying mechanisms that's going on. So that was one of our goals, is to explain to parents the psychology, I guess, around what they're seeing and why, and then telling them maybe how they can help to manage that. So initially it was for parents, and it was to reduce some of this anxiety, which again, I myself, even knowing some of this stuff, found it quite difficult feeding my children. But we've since developed that. So we've moved on from just an offering for parents, but also training for childcare staff, nursery workers. Because one of the things we've also seen in a piece of research that we've done is how some of these pitfalls are being used in nurseries. So there is sometimes a pressure to finish everything that's on the plate. Kids are refusing food but try and coerce them, that kind of thing. So again, anybody who's involved in feeding a child really will come across these things because they are developmental in children. All children are exhibiting this, so a lot of people fall into these behaviours. So we've gone from just an offering to parents to developing training to other people that are employed in looking after children.
And would that, you mentioned the NHS there, would that extend to NHS, the medical professionals as well? Or is it more caregivers and nurseries and things like that?
No, we also have training for health professionals. So that would be, anybody like health visitors, anybody that's involved and interested in that. So, again, they're people that are passing advice on to parents. So this can be quite useful for them to go through the training, but also then have this as a resource that they can recommend to the parents that they're seeing. And,
I've been on there and we've talked through, the majority of the headlines of the website today. And I think there's a lot of guidelines that people can go on to. Is it entirely free access for that information?
Yeah, our website's completely free, so anybody can go on there. Our training courses for childcare professionals and health professionals are paid to use. There's accreditation at the end of it, so they're kind of CPD exercise.
Yeah, but we were really keen throughout the development of all of this that we wanted the information to be freely available. So actually, we didn't want cost to be a barrier to people accessing the research findings that we were doing and that others were doing. So yes, all of the things we've talked about today, more information about them is on the Child Feeding Guide website and it's freely available.
And that's childfeedingguide.co.uk?
That's it.
Yep. So people can find out anything they want from that website. And does that give information for health professionals or anybody who wants to kind of go onto the courses and find out more there?
Yeah, it's a one-stop shop. So there's all the information about the common feeding pitfalls, the tips and tools. There's links for signing up for health professionals or childcare professionals for the training. And if we've missed anything, there's a contact us page as well.
Nice. And do we know so far, how long has the website been out for?
We launched it initially in 2012, I think, and we did a big revamp of it in 2018.
And do you know what kind of reach you've had and impact you've had from the website?
Yeah, it's been pretty impressive. I think the last time we checked the stats, we knew we've had more than 150,000 unique users, and most of those are in the UK. But we can see on the analytics data that there's global users as well. And I think partly that's because the Child Feeding Guide is recommended by the NHS, so that's helped to kind of get the word out there. And then also we know that it's kind of been spreading through word of mouth and through health professionals who recommend it to families that they work with and childcare settings who use it as well. So yeah, it's had some pretty good reach so far. Nice.
Well, from our analytics, we know about 30% of listeners are international listeners. So hopefully they can get hold of this and push this around their countries wherever they are. So that will be good. What do you see as being next for the Child Feeding Guide? Is there a next step?
Yeah, we've got a few plans in the pipeline, I think. We're always keen to make sure that the content is up to date. So we've got some plans to kind of make sure that we're revisiting it and adding in some extra information. We know that things like grandparents are having more of a role in caring for children. So all of the information that we've talked about is applicable to whichever group of caregivers we're talking about, but we might do some slightly more tailored grandparenting information in there as well. Gemma, what else have we got planned?
We might be covering some kind of additional issues that people may come across. So children that maybe are eating a lot and how to manage that without being too restrictive. Mentioned earlier about sensory issues. So some children's fussiness might be exacerbated by that. So there's various different things that we may add in over time.
Thank you very much. We've been through lots of details there of the Child Feeding Guide. Hopefully highlighted some mistakes that we're all making, hopefully provided some guides, and go away if you're listening to this and thinking, there's lots of things there, go and try one or two of these things and see what works. I think see what works for you. Follow these guidelines. If you want to find out more information, go to childfeedingguide.co.uk, and there is the contact to contact you guys to if you've got any questions.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to the Experts in Sport podcast. If you'd like to get in touch, then please contact me, Martin Foster, at m.foster@loughborough.ac.uk. Thanks for listening. See you next time.